fire, oil, hour. These are just some of the words that my students come to me asking questions about how to pronounce. They look deceptively easy. They're pretty short. At least when you read them, they don't look overly complex. But some aspects of the R's and the L's in these words can really trip up a lot of English students. I'm hoping to clear up some of the confusion with these sounds for you today. Hi there, I'm Luke, your friendly language and linguistics enthusiast, and this is Go Natural English. This is the third and final part of our North American English R series. In parts 1 and 2, I talked about some of the basics of making the sound. And in this video, I'm going to expand upon it and apply some of these principles to some of the trickiest sounds that we have in English with I'm also going to include some pronunciation of advanced L sounds because some of the strategies that we'll use for can also help you in your pronunciation of L. And I hope that that will become clearer as we progress through the video. If you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, do check those out because I think that will give you a good foundation for this third and final video. I also made a video on diphthongs, which are certain types of vowels that we use in English that I think will be useful to understanding some of the things that we're going to discuss today. I'll leave links to those videos in the description box below, so feel free to check those out when you can. As always, be sure to stay tuned throughout because I'll be peppering in plenty of practice as we go along. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up because it really helps us build our community together. So, quick review. In part 1, we discussed that is the building block for all sounds that have an R in them. This is the that you find in words like her and stir. I call this the building block because we can apply this sound to help us pronounce any other R that we encounter in English. In part 2, we built upon the and applied it to what's called pre-vocalic r, which is the one that is at the beginning of words and syllables before the vowel. You see this in words like red, rose, free, tree, and strong. But what about other words? Like hair. That's not really an otherwise it would be her. And as we know, her and hair are different words. It's also not a true pre-vocalic r because it's after the vowel and at the end of the word. So what's the deal? How do we say this sound? Well, let's break it down. I like to call these R-colored diphthongs, which sounds like a really fancy word, but don't worry, it's easy when we break it down into smaller parts. If you recall from my video on diphthongs, those are when you use two vowels together to form a syllable. So take, for example, the common I, like I am hungry. The I is formed by an A and an E coming together quickly. I, right? We're going to apply those same principles to the rest of these words that have in them. Let's start with these two, or and air. Or is used in words like or, store, more, and roar. Air is used in words like hair, fair, lair, and mare. If you slow these down, they act like diphthongs, like we discussed with I. So if you slow down more, it's like they're two separate sounds, the O and the more. It's almost like it's got that same that we discussed in part 1. Same thing with all the others. Store, roar. Do you see how it's almost like when you say them slowly, that it's two vowels coming together, the O and the The same can be applied with air, hair, fair. So how do we make these? For or, we do an O sound like an oi. So or. or. For air, we use an eh sound, like in get and bed. Air. 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 Do you hear that? Air. So those are two fairly straightforward illustrations of it. Things get a little bit interesting when you add an to an existing diphthong. These are the existing diphthongs in English. We have O like in row, A like in may, I like in high, ow like in the word ow, and oi like in coy. Let's add an into the mix and see what happens. For O, like in row, we get row-er. Let's add an to those diphthongs and see what happens, because there's a pattern that emerges. Row-er, mayor, higher, hour, coyer. Did you notice that there was a second syllable in there? Instead of having 3 vowels in one syllable, a common pattern that we do in American English is we make it into 2 syllables because it's easier to say. 1-syllable words like row and mow become 2-syllable words when you add an like in rower and mower. The same thing happens with a, where 1-syllable diphthongs like a, like in may, and lay, become 2-syllable words when you add an mayor and layer. This can result in some pretty interesting distinctions in English. For example, layer versus lair, mower versus more, where layer has 2 syllables and lair has 1 syllable. Notice how the vowels change. Layer has 3 vowels, e, and whereas lair has 2, e and Similarly, with the word more versus mower. More is 1 syllable because it just has o, more, whereas mower has o, and mower. In fact, some American dialects, such as in the South, make these words that are just or and air into ower and ayer. So you will hear some Southern dialects say things like, I want more, or that's not fair, where they make what was in general American English just 2 vowels, o, and and made it into 3, making it need to be a 2-syllable word. Mower, fair. Now let's apply it to some other words. We see the same pattern, like in ire, like fire and higher, in hour, as well as in oyer. What's important to notice is that sometimes spelling makes it look simpler than it really is. For example, fire looks like a 1-syllable word on the face of it, but in actuality, it's really pronounced like a 2-syllable word by most North American English speakers. Same thing with the word hour. Looks like a pretty short word, 4 letters. You would think, oh, that's probably 1 syllable. But in fact, it's really 2 syllables. Hour. I think this can be useful for my English learning students because sometimes they pronounce these words without the true 2 syllables. So they say fire like far, or they say hour like hour. And they sound a bit like words like far and are, which can sometimes be confusing for English speakers to understand. So by making these words 2 syllables, I think it can do wonders in terms of how clear your speech is. I wanted to mention L in this as well because, believe it or not, L often follows a similar pattern, at least in standard North American English. And I think it can actually be a useful strategy for my students to pronounce some words that end in L that are a bit more difficult to say. So take, for example, the word oil. Oil. It is perfectly acceptable in North American English to separate this into 2 syllables, and it's a little bit easier to say because it gives you time to focus on that L sound that can be tricky for a lot of students. Apply this to a bunch of words that end in L, such as ones that have the diphthong I. You can say file, pile, mile. By separating them into 2 syllables, it can often be much easier to say. Same thing with owl. It can be easier to say owl and towel. In fact, many North American English speakers, myself included, only pronounce these with 2 syllables. Finally, like the example I gave you with oil, you can apply it to other words that end with oil, such as foil and boil. I hope that you found these tips useful and that you can apply them to some of the more trickier R and L sounds. For further practice, I would like you to think of the hardest word that has the R sound in it and write it down in the comments down below. I'd like you to discuss what strategies you found useful in maybe improving just a little bit in your pronunciation of this word. Maybe a different thing that you learned over the course of this series that you didn't know before and that you think might be useful for other words with R. If you liked the tips in this video, don't miss our free Go Natural tips by email. You can sign up for free and it takes 2 seconds. Super easy. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it will help you continue to improve in your English pronunciation. If you'd like to check out more videos like this, click up here. I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye!